last video, we talked a lot about notation and using those functions, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. Now we're talking about kind of how to use this weird notation of f of x. I know it looks weird. Why don't they just put y equals? Well, it's a simpler way to use it. It's kind of like you have a name. It's the name of this equation. So this equation is an f. So they're asking us to figure out what f of negative 3 is. Basically, they're saying, what happens when x is negative 3? So we're going to plug every single x as a negative 3 into our equation. So let's write it out and let's make sure we're using the correct notation. So I'm going to replace each of these x's with a negative 3. And then really, you could plug this entire thing right here into your calculator. Just make sure you're using those parentheses, especially with this negative 3. Negatives can be sticky. Make sure you're using parentheses around them. Okay, so when you do plug that all into your calculator, you should get a positive 28. So this is telling us with the equation f, when we plugged in the x is negative 3, we got the answer of 28. So in that whole little package right there, it tells you a ton of different information, and that's why we use this weird notation. So this is what our answer should look like. All right, let's look at example 4. Looking a little different. Now, they said f of g. So before, when there was something inside that parentheses, we plugged it into the x of the equation f. Same thing, but now they're telling us to plug in wherever there's an x in the equation f. We're going to plug in the equation g. That sounds so weird to say and confusing. Let's do it. So I'm going to plug in this x and this x. I am putting this equation into both of them. So let's write that out. 4 minus x squared plus, I'm plugging in the equation again, 4 minus x plus 2. So I took the equation f and plugged in the equation g to it. Let's simplify it as much as we possibly can. We need to do a little multiplying out because this right here is a 4 minus x times a 4 minus x. Let's multiply that out and see what happens. That'll make it look a little nicer. 4 times 4, 16. 4 times a negative x, negative 4x. Negative x times 4, negative 4x. And negative x times negative x is a positive x squared. So we can put these together. So let's write that over there. So we got 16 minus 8x plus x squared plus a 4 minus x. We don't really need parentheses around that one. Plus 2. Now let's just put together our like terms. The x squared doesn't go with anybody, so I'm going to bring that down first. X's here and here can go together to give us negative 9x. And then we have 3 numbers that can go together, 16, 4, and 2, to give us 22. All right, next example, we're practicing plugging in equations to each other. So they could write that in different ways. They could write it using what we just saw, or sometimes they use this funny notation with a little open circle. It's kind of the same thing. I don't know why there's 2 different ways to write it, but there is. So let's do the first one. We're going to do f, and we're plugging in g to the f equation. So I'm taking this, and anywhere there's an x, I'm putting in that equation. So x minus 5 squared plus 1. Now it's an x minus 5 squared, so it's times itself. So let's multiply it out. X times x, x squared. X times negative 5, negative 5 times x, and negative 5 times negative 5. We can put some like terms together when we bring it back over. So x squared minus 10x plus 25, and that plus 1 is still on the end. Don't forget about it. which means we can put those together too. So let's do that. Always simplify as much as you can. And there is our final answer for that one. All right, now we're gonna use this other notation of g of x. So basically, it's another way to write what we were just kind of talking about, but now the way they wrote it, they want us to take the g equation, and anywhere there's a g, we are gonna plug in the f equation. So this kind of is the same thing as saying this. Or this one can also be written as that. Two different ways to write it, and that's okay. So I'm going to take x squared plus 1 and put it into that equation where the x was minus 5, which there's nothing really to multiply out. There's no distributing, but I can do 1 minus 5 to give me a negative 4, and that's my final answer. All right, let's look at this one. Same problem, we're gonna do two different ways, and you can decide which way you wanna do it. Okay, so the first way, it's asking us to do f of g. So we're taking the g equation, plugging it in to the x, and you'll notice right here, there's no x. So they're asking us to also figure out what happens when x is 3 when we're doing this plugging in of the equation. Whoa. So, when you do this, you could do what we just did in our last problem. So let's do it that way first. So if I plug in this g equation to the x, I would do x plus 1 squared. And I'm going to worry about the 3 later. If you want to do that method, cool. Let's do it. Okay, so x plus 1 squared is the same thing as x plus 1 times an x plus 1. And we would multiply it all out. So x times x is x squared. X times 1. 1 times x. And 1 times 1. Which we can put together some like terms. 1x plus 1x would be 2x. And that's really as simplified as we can get. But they also wanted to know what happens when x is 3. Well, let's plug those in. Let's figure out if I plug in 3 now, what do I get? If I plug all that jazz into my calculator or do it all out in your brain, whatever works for you, you should get the answer of 16. Now, that method is fine. There's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. But I have a probably quicker way if it's the way your brain works. So, from this get-go, when I took the x plus 1 and plugged it into the f equation, I could also at that point plug the 3 in to the x because they're not asking what it is, what the simplified equation was. They just want to know the answer when x is 3. So I could do that. 3 plus 1 would be 4. 4 squared is 16. Both gave us the exact same answer. Neither way is better than the other one. Whatever way your brain works is the best way for you. So head on over to the 5.5 Part 2 worksheet and try out some practice.